You are listening to Talking Images, the official podcast of icmforum.com.
Welcome everyone to our season 5 finale. We made it to 5 years. 107 episodes plus the pilot are now available on Spotify and anywhere else where you may want to consume podcasts, including YouTube. If you're listening there, welcome to the Talking Images experience. Also, if you're listening on release, be New Year. But what better time to just take a little mini break here, because it's not just us that hit 5 years. We started in 2020, so the 2020s have hit their midway point as well. It's halfway done. And with that, it might just be fun to look back at the years that have passed by and see if we have anything at all to say about this decade at the midway point. We'll talk about what makes us excited, what makes us sad, what makes us annoyed, and we'll also try to guess what the 2020s will be remembered for. So this might be the great point to bring in my three absolutely fantastic co-hosts, Arthur, Saul, and Adam. And I'll start by just asking you guys the broadest, most pedantic and annoying question of all. How do you feel about the 2020s so far? And I can put that question to you first, Arthur.
I've kind of actually been following the more mainstream films now because there are some really weird trends going on. I guess the most succinct summary of it is that we're kind of at the next movement of 60s Hollywood. Because if you really think about it, the 60s was just complete garbage, and that contributed to a bunch of foreign films being watched, and then the new Hollywood movement in the 70s coming in. I think we're going to be at the same point with that, because it's obvious that some AI is being used, especially Disney doing the whole, we'll fix it in post kind of thing. There's this critic named Jeff Zhang, and he showed how bad the lighting is in a lot of films, but in the end, the big thing I could think of is that stuff can be a box office failure, but still make enough money to be in the I Check Movies box office list, which I actually find really amusing. So yeah, I feel like Hollywood is going to collapse very soon, and I think that's why a lot of people are watching Korean dramas and Indian films right now. It's just the same thing as when the 60s were watching more Bergman instead of whatever was going on. I'm sure even us cinephiles forgot a lot about 60s Hollywood. As for the more art house stuff, I feel like it's kind of consistent to what it always has been. Aside from the obvious beginning of the decade where we had COVID and then we had all the writer's strike, but I feel like now we're at the point where it's recovering, and I'm slowly trying to find all the hidden gems.
Wow, yeah, that's that's an interesting theory that Hollywood might just be about to collapse. That would be, yeah. I mean, I feel like the 2010s actually was that really weak period of Hollywood in particular, and that, well, it's not quite Hollywood, that A24 and Neon have really started to pick up some of those threads and are starting to really allow auteurs to just do their thing again. I mean, Sean Baker, who's probably the most promising young American director, yeah, Greta Gerwig is there as well, but almost every single film he's done has been with A24. This year he did Anora with Neon, and there is that freshness of the 70s again a little bit in these films. And I think that what we've seen, especially with the Oscars and things like that, is that there's a mix, but I feel like the Oscars are leaning far more cinephile. We're getting a lot more exciting choices there. We have a film like Anora who's actually, being thought that at least getting a nomination, that would probably not be possible 10 years ago. So I think that in some ways, cinema is in a pretty exciting place. I mean, One of the things that excited me the most was, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but like Poor Things was essentially a success. That's a full-on art house movie with black and white, oversaturated colors, all kinds of craziness, and it made lots of money. Like, you wouldn't expect that to be possible. You wouldn't expect people to be seeing that film again if it was 10-20 years ago. So wow, cinema isn't a weird place. I think you're right about that, and we might be in the middle of this shift. And what about you, Saul? How do you feel about the 2020s so far?
I'm feeling a lot more optimistic about 2020 cinema than I was at the start of the decade. We had 2020 with COVID, and we had a lot of releases that were delayed. And then we had end of 2020, early 2021, where a lot of the films were coming out. Well, cheap, cash in, stay at home pandemic. This person's scared of going out. So I think there are a lot of really cheap films, at least dropped to the streaming services towards the end of 2020 and 21. And I've got actually very few favourites from those 2 years. So those 2 years for cinema are quite weak for me. But then we had 22 come out. And in 2022, we had Everything Everywhere All at Once, Triangle of Sadness, The Fabelmans, and that's only among the Best Picture nominees. There were so many great films that came out in 2022. And then last year, 2023, we had Anatomy of a Fall, Poor Things, The Zone of Interest, and so on. And again, that's just from the Best Picture nominees. There are still great films being made from around the world. So actually, according to IMDb, I've got really high average ratings for the last 2 years of cinema. So yeah, like 2023, I've seen 157 films as of this recording date, and it's my 8th highest rated year for film. And 2022 is only a few years behind that, according to my IMDb stats. I've actually given out very high average ratings for those 2 years. So those 2 years have really restored my faith in cinema, but I was definitely quite worried with 2020 and 2021.
Wow, that's pretty impressive, and I'm happy to hear that it's going that damn well for the 2020s. I mean, maybe this will end up being one of your favorite decades then.
Yeah, it might do. That would be interesting, because if I go back and again, I'm just doing it by IMDb stats because it's the easiest one. I mean, most of my highest rated decades got most of the years in the 60s up there, plus 75 and 76, then a couple of the 20s. But beyond that, beyond 2022 and 2023, my highest rated year is 2013. And 2013 was an amazing year for cinema. We had Wolf of Wall Street. We had Inside Llewyn Davis. We had lots of great films also from all around the world. It was a really strong year for cinema, and I guess I haven't felt that positive about cinema really since 2013. So I think things are really picking up, and we'll see how it goes. Maybe it will end up being one of those better decades for film.
That's really interesting. And actually, I was not that hopeful about cinema in the mid-10s, and then now I'm starting to get more and more hopeful again. Though I did think that, for instance, 2019 was an amazing year as well.
2019 was a great year. We had Parasite, of course, and there were tons of other great films. But so 2019, I think I had quite a few favorites. 2017 was pretty strong. 2016, 2018, 2015, 2014, all of those ones, I have a lot less favorites. So we'll see how we go, but I've definitely had 2 years in a row, or maybe 3 coming up, because 2024 has been looking pretty good so far. I don't want to spoil anything because we're going to do our best of 2024 podcast in the next season of Talking Images. But 2024 is shaping up to be really strong also so far. I've already got one film in my all-time top 500, and there's quite a few that aren't too far below that, just from 2024.
Absolutely amazing. I'm so happy to hear that for you, Son. I think it's also really exciting that we got Adam to join this episode. I begged and finally managed to annoy him enough to join. And it's really fitting too, because he was my co-host in the pilot. He's now back here for a season 5 finale, 5 years later. And I know that you have been watching more recent films than ever before, Adam. So I'd love to just hear a little bit about your motivation for just diving deep into 2020's films. I remember you told me just a few days ago that that's where your focus is at. That's what you're interested in right now. Like it'll be a struggle to break from it. So what is it with this new string of watching these films from the 2020s that speaks so much to you at the moment?
Well, hi, Chris. Delighted to join you. Thank you for the invite. That was very nice of you to ask me to join once. For a while, I was kind of only watching genres or certain films that I was really interested in, and I felt like I was really lacking an understanding of new films. So sometimes people would ask me about the latest releases, and I often hadn't seen that many of them. So I decided this decade to basically try and get a good overview of all the different films. So I'm watching various award winners or nominees like the Oscars and BAFTAs, and I'm also watching films from like the They Shoot Pictures Don't the 21st Century list, Sight and Sound list. So I'm kind of getting an overview of the art house ones and the sort of really big blockbusters.
That's actually a really interesting set to be in, because you're essentially catching up on a decade. You have like the big mainstream awards, and then you have like Sight and Sounds list at the same time. And I can also share with the viewers that on Iceland Movies, Adam actually compiled all of the votes that Sight and Sound has done every single year to make its own version of their best films of the 2020s, which is really helpful for me as well. I've been following it a bit as it's been building up, and picking films from it too. So thank you for that, Adam. Arthur, I mean, you mentioned a few grievances already, but in terms of, you mentioned AI, you mentioned that Hollywood is essentially crashing down. You're just really, really upset with Hollywood in general. What would you say is your biggest bone to pick with cinema in the 2020s? Just to start off with a really negative tone, and then we can switch it up and be a bit more positive later. Like, what is it that makes you the most sad, annoyed, or even angry?
It was basically me seeing this one Twitter thread actually where I forgot which film it was, but I know it was one of the Disney films where it was just people chatting in a room, and it was down to everything being green screen to the point of like someone holding something just being a green object that they can fix it in post. And I feel like at that point it just adds too much stress on the CGI companies, and possibly with the lack of time as well, because I assume the producers could come in and just be like, oh, I don't like that the vase looks like that, change it to this, and just order those fixes at the last minute. And I feel like with that, the magic is basically gone. I know if Gladiator 2, I didn't see it yet, but there was something like 1,000 shots using CGI when the first part had almost none. And I feel like that there's not really any directing anymore, if that makes sense. It's more just let the CGI companies do it, let the editors do it. And although they contribute a big part to it, I am big into auteurism, even vulgar auteurism. And I'm kind of scared that, well, I wouldn't say I'm scared that that's going to end soon, but I think that's what's going to contribute to the big collapse. I even seen some comic book type of YouTube channels saying that stuff feels like insurance company commercials now. Like, I think the recent Christmas movie was that. So I've never really been a huge fan of blockbusters, but I found like even the 90s and 2000s ones that were like complete failures, they were just inoffensive, fun things. Like stuff you'd forget about in a week, but you wouldn't mind seeing them at the time. And seeing the stuff now, they're just full-on torture.
Wow, that's a very dark take. I'm not even sure if I agree with a large part of that. I think I agree with you that in Hollywood there's been a really, really, really disappointing move away from basic, interesting aesthetics. I think that especially if you look at the majority of Marvel films, for instance, they're not beautiful. Most shot compositions are bland. I remember, like, even back in the Avengers first one, there's just a lot of people standing around talking, and there's no real visual drama. It's really, really frustrating to see that, you have all of this money, but the money is not used on amazing cinematography in most of the cases. Though, to be fair, in the 90s, in the 2000s, if you look at the blockbusters, that wasn't the case either. I mean, it's not like the Transformers had fantastic cinematography. It's not. And if anything, I think that some blockbusters are bucking the trend, like Dune. I don't remember how much CGI is in there. It must be quite a lot. But like those films, take their inspiration from Lawrence of Arabia, for instance, I think they do look great. So I do think that there is a counter to that as well, but it is a bit frustrating. What we thought about the 2020s, you were the most positive by far, Saul, but do you have any gripes to pick with the 2020s? Are there any trends or anything that's happening this decade that's making you sad, annoyed, or angry?
Well, the main things that have made me, I don't want to say angry, I don't think films really drive that anger in me, but what probably annoyed me most was, end of 2020, 21, like I said, pandemic cinema, all these cheap films made to sort of cash in on, we could stay at home and film so cheap, and it's sort of like Blair Witch Project all over again. We get like really crappy films being made on the cheap, and people going, "Oh, this relates to the pandemic." I mean, of the pandemic, we did at least have two really good films came out. We did have Bad Luck Banging, which was great, from Radu Yuda, and also Sick from Kevin Williamson. They were great. But a lot of the films that have cashed in on the pandemic just haven't really been that good. And I think in 10 years' time, they're just going to seem really irrelevant. I mean, I saw Sick much later than other people did. I only saw that a few months ago, but I still have the pandemic fresh in mind. So, that still worked for me. I don't know if it'll work as well 10 years down the track. I think those films from 2020, 2021 won't hold up so well. But other than pandemic cinema, the only other thing I'd say is we've seen a real rise of streaming service originals. So the 2010s, it was mainly just like Netflix originals, and now we're getting things from Prime and we're getting things from Tubi. And there have actually been some really good Tubi originals lately, so I don't want to slam all of them, but a lot of them aren't really that great. It just doesn't seem to be as great or as fresh as the stuff that's coming out from mainstream cinema or from things that are actually getting put into theaters. So I guess those cheap films, those ones that can be easily done on the sly, I think we're seeing a rise of those. Getting definitely a lot of really cheap budget films coming out. And I guess it's good to have that outlet for people to be creative, but it's sort of like diluting like things. But then again, my IMDb average rating has been really good for the last 2 years, so maybe it's not diluting as much as it should be, or maybe I'm just avoiding the stuff that would dilute the average rating. But look, it's just the rise of the originals, and not all of those streaming originals are that great, and just the pandemic stuff is a bit annoying. I think most of the stuff, the way cinema's trending at the moment, last 3 years, if we do from 2022 to 2024, has actually been on the positive. It's been on the rise for me.
I'm surprised you didn't mention Apple TV there, because obviously Coda won Best Picture even, which is, in my opinion, one of the worst Best Picture winners of all time. It just feels like a bloody TV pilot.
Yeah, look, Coda wasn't. I mean, it wasn't bad. It's not the worst Best Picture winner of all time, but it's definitely in the bottom quarter. It's not. It wasn't a great film, but then 2021 wasn't a great year for cinema. Like, we're looking at the other films that were nominated for Best Picture that year, and look, Power of the Dog was a better film, but I still didn't like it as much as most people did. And I did like Nightmare Alley quite a bit, but most people didn't. But like King Richard, I mean, I'm really glad that Coda beat King Richard, for example. So I think a lot of the Best Picture nominees just weren't that strong that year. So I think that's part of how Coda sort of crept into that. But, Apple Originals, they've been up and down. I mean, Killers of the Flower Moon wasn't brilliant, but it's one of Scorsese's better films. So they are doing some good stuff. I just think the way that they release the films is a bit weird, or not weird, but I can understand, but it's a bit annoying or whatever. It's like, well, you can rent this off us for like however many months, and it'll be free for you to stream, and like if it's an original, surely we should just be able to watch it straight away. Like when the Knives Out sequel came out, you could watch it as soon as it dropped to Netflix. You didn't have to rent it before doing it. So yeah, I mean, Apple TV, I'm not really that big on it, but like, they've done some decent stuff.
I guess I just haven't seen enough of them to tell. What about you, Adam? I mean, do you lean more towards Saul or Arthur here? I mean, I think you mentioned that you've seen quite a lot of blockbusters. Like, what's your overall impression on what's going on in Hollywood with the big budget films right now?
A lot of the Marvel type films have been on my watch list for like a year, and I still have almost no interest in watching any of them. So yeah, I guess I've watched quite a few of the blockbusters, but I'm probably missing out on, I don't know what ones you would consider the biggest blockbusters of this decade so far. Quite liked Barbie, thought it was quite interesting, but things like Avatar 2, I really like all style basically and no substance. So things like Avatar 2, yeah, not interested in at all, even though I've watched it. Or, you know, like Gladiator 2 has just come out. I still have, I'll watch it at some point, but I still have very little interest in those types of films. Whereas I feel like Barbie was doing something a little bit different. I guess ones where the plot is a little bit more interesting, I'm interested in. But when it's ones that are kind of massive blockbuster, like, you know, like Avatar type films that are just spending absolutely hundreds of millions of dollars, and in my opinion, you know, don't really have much content in terms of storyline. It's kind of 3 hours of like amazing special effects. I still have very, very little interest in that kind of film. Probably less than I used to, actually.
Yeah, I'll co-sign that, Adam. I mean, Avatar 2. I mean, it's okay, perfectly fine, but I mean, it's even more watered out and thin in the plot than the first one. And I actually quite like the first Avatar, but this is just, I agree with you with Barbie. I actually thought Barbie was great. And I think that's another one of those counterpoints to what Arthur was saying a little bit, though I don't think he was talking about Barbie. I mean, one of the big things that was going on last year was that, you know, Barbie and Oppenheimer topped the box office. Was that how unusual that was, you know, that you had these two films that were directed by auteurs. They cared about the visuals. I mean, Oppenheimer was like first 20-30 minutes of that was almost like a Malik movie a little bit too. Like it's very visually flashy. So I think that there is if not the counter reactions, there are exceptions to the rule. Maybe it's just like the Marvel movies that are looking really bad, because even though I didn't actually care for the Batman at all, I mean, in fact, I liked quite a few Marvel movies better. I mean, the visuals of the Batman was actually pretty interesting. It really went for a visual style as opposed to the Marvel films. So, yeah, I wouldn't say the box office is devoid of style in total, but like a lot of the biggest films, yeah, I'll quote an Arthur a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I just looked at the iCheck movies box office list, and to be honest, I still haven't seen that many that are on that list. I guess Barbie's probably. I actually really liked Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse as well, which kind of surprised me. I thought that was excellent. It's quite a lot of rubbish on the box office list that I would probably not watch. I don't want to take things too far off topic, but I can see Wish on the list, and that was really, really bad. I don't know if you guys have seen Wish, but yeah, that was
No, I skipped that one.
it's yeah, that was like really weird, very, very bad.
There is speculation that AI wrote the script for that, actually, because it was made during the writer's strike, and apparently the writing just felt like very illogical. So
Yeah, that makes sense. It was like almost deliberately bad.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I'm skipping a lot of the blockbusters as well. I mean, I still haven't seen all of the Despicable Me sequels, even though I like the first few. I'm not following the Jurassic Park or World series anymore either. And I'm more or less stopped caring about Marvel. Though I did watch Deadpool and Wolverine, which I actually really, really liked. So who knows? Though I will say the visuals were not that great in that one. But now we have talked about negatives. It seems like most of the negatives are all about Hollywood and blockbusters, unless you have any other thorns in your side, Adam.
I guess probably the hardest part of all the films I've been watching is there's quite a few very like generic, often like American films, and like for example, when you follow the Golden Globes list, that kind of thing, there's quite a few very like generic, safe American films that are like you turn on for 90 minutes, 2 hours, and they're okay, but they're like maybe 6 out of 10 kind of films. So that's probably the worst part of the films I've been watching so far. Is just these really like, something like that Nobody film, Nobody from 2021. There's quite a lot of these films that are just very like samey. So they're probably worse for me to watch than some of the big blockbusters. Whereas I'd rather see something that's a little bit different, which is maybe why I like something like Barbie. I feel like it's doing something new. Whereas when you watch a lot of the award winners, you start to see a few that are, yeah, pretty uninspired, and yeah, that they're the worst ones I've found so far. Even worse than, there's some films I dislike, but at least I kind of get what they're going for. It's been quite challenging watching some of the sort of 90-minute American safe kind of films that don't appeal to me at all. And there's quite a few of them, and more than I realized.
So the gripe here is, I guess it comes back to Hollywood bad, but now it's not just the Hollywood blockbuster, it's the Hollywood prestige films as well that feel a bit dull. I've been going over the Golden Globe list last few years. I don't know. Yes and no. I mean, in 2022, I mean, you had The Fabelmans, Avatar, Elvis, Tar, and Top Gun Maverick as the nominees for Best Film, and I haven't even cared to see Top Gun Maverick yet. I wasn't a fan of The Fabelmans. Tar is the only one I consider great there. So, yeah, and then the year before, you had things like King Richard. Yeah.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, there's good ones. There's very good ones as well. In Golden Globes and all of them have good ones, but because I've been watching like all the award nominees, you just get quite a lot that are nominated for categories that aren't like Best Picture. They're more like some of the lesser categories, and it brings in some really safe, mediocre ones as well. It's partly my fault for trying to watch everything rather than I'm trying to make myself watch everything, like watch more that I might not necessarily normally watch. But it doesn't represent my like overall feeling on the 2020s. It's just there's downsides from trying to watch so much.
Yes, no, I get it. I mean, I'm sure if we looked over the extended awards list from the 10s or the zeros or earlier to it would be similar. But yes, it seems like people are not very, very happy about Hollywood.
If you want the absolute worst one, then music from 2021 is just the absolute worst ever.
Music?
It's like I watched it because it got nominated for 2 Golden Globes. One of them was Kate Hudson, Best Actress. It's like it's following a girl on the autism spectrum, but the actress doesn't have autism, is not on the spectrum herself, and it's just really. It's kind of rubs you up the wrong way. That's the absolute worst, and that's the kind of one where it's a Golden Globe award. It's not the Best Picture, but they have some very odd choices like that. But it's
3.2
not.
on IMDb out of 10.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's it was really controversial because of the autism spectrum storyline. Yeah, it's kind of like almost like offensive. That's the downside of watching everything from these awards is you get some bizarre choices alongside the better ones.
I mean, it makes things fun, I guess, though. Or at least, unexpected. Like I wouldn't have expected to see a pop musical as well as a psychological thriller with 3.2 out of 10 on IMDb. That's not the kind of award bait I would have expected to see. And yes,
I guess, and also, sorry, just finally, like, that's an example of one that's doing something kind of offensive and has a particularly low rating. You then get ones like The Tender Bar, which was like George Clooney directed, Ben Affleck's in it, and it's like there's numerous examples like The Tender Bar that are kind of like a safe, easy storyline that you've seen 100 times before. And they're the kind of ones that, out of all the films I see, they're the ones I like the least when I'm watching other films, because there's like absolutely nothing new and absolutely nothing different. But like Ben Affleck got a Golden Globe nominee, so I watched it. So there are quite a lot of just very generic films like that. There's nothing of note and there's nothing memorable, and it's a film that you've probably seen many times before with a slightly different plot that I object to the most. Whereas I feel like the decade itself actually has quite a lot of very interesting films.
Yeah, no. So this is a warning to everyone then to not do a deep dive into the Golden Globes, at least, and maybe a lot of these awards. I have certainly been warned as well, and I will not be making that mistake. in terms of my gripes, I mean, I think I've aired a little bit of them already, so I want to hurry on to get this episode to something more positive. But I do co-sign a lot of what both Adam and Arthur have been saying. I do think that Hollywood is indeed in a bit of a decline period. Most interesting films that I personally have loved from the last decade have either been from, well, not the US, or from A24, Neon, and similar studios. It's very, very few Hollywood films I can remember that actually popped up like in my top 10 of the year or even top 20 of the year. There's going to be a couple of exceptions, of course, but I can't remember a period where Hollywood was just this starved in terms of creative talent. I mean, we did have the counter reaction with Barbie and Oppenheimer, sure, but like overall, it's not at its best place. So, all Hollywood fans who disagree with us, come to icmforum.com and just disagree with us. There will be a thread up for this episode. But now then, the bad stuff is out of the way. Now we can celebrate. We can celebrate the new year. We can celebrate cinema in the 2020s. What are some things about cinema this past decade that you absolutely love and gets you excited, gives you hope, etc.? And we can start with you, Arthur.
I wouldn't go as far as to say it gives me pure hope, but it's kind of interesting that we're kind of in the next horror movement that we had in the early 2000s. I remember back then Eli Roth said that there was a big torture porn movement because of the Iraq War, and it was kind of a response to that. I feel like now with stuff like COVID, we're kind of in the next wave right now, because if you look up a lot of the, I wouldn't say blockbuster level box office hits, but the lower budget horrors are actually still making tons of money, like a surprising amount. And another response like to the Iraq War I noticed was the abortion cases, because there's already 3 horror movies based off of abortion. I won't say what they are because it kind of spoils it, but it kind of makes me curious to see what the next horror movements are going to be in the future. But the things I'm mostly excited for is actually Indian cinema. I've noticed it's a lot better these days. Or at least we're trying to seek them more out now because we're bored of what's going on with Hollywood. The biggest highlight to me was probably actually Brahma Yugan, which like if A24 distributed it in North America, I'm sure it would have been considered like a modern horror classic. And I've noticed a lot of people now are looking towards B movies in general, both horror and action, because I guess they're standing out more by focusing more on style, and that kind of makes it stand out over the kind of empty stuff that Hollywood is making these days.
That's a really interesting shout there. First of all, I just watched Brahmagan a couple of days ago. Yes, like this has everything an A24 horror film should be. I mean, I remember like thinking about the slow build up, but just tension, etc. I was thinking about everything from Midsummer to The Lighthouse, etc. It's great. It also has a lot of fun. It's not art house. It's just like it went for black and white for the atmosphere. It traps you in this house. It has this just so much fun with that lead villain role as well. It just shines in terms of venom. I think India is an interesting place too, because I am watching more Indian films, probably not as much as you, but I was one of those people who just generally, like if it wasn't pie on set and sound, etc., I wouldn't actively seek it out. There are a lot of like this more empty like Americanish things too, like 12th Fail. It's like you still have those big films. They're still winning over people in India. I'm not a fan of those films. I think they're really, really bloody bland. But I do think India is really. Oh yeah, Adam is writing here. Back to negatives. I won't say that, but I will say that India is definitely stepping up. I'm not a horror fan like you, Arthur, but it's great to hear that we're seeing these rumblings of low-budget horror rising to the top and getting you excited again. So you were the one that was the most positive about the changes or what's happening in the 2020s, to the point that you said that this could theoretically end up becoming your favorite, or at least one of your favorite decades, if this trend continues. It just catching so many films you're loving. Like, what is it that makes you the most happy about the 2020s? Is it just that you're seeing so many great films and there's no real connection between them, or are you seeing any particular trends or countries or genres that you love and that's just really delivering in terms of quality?
Yeah, I don't know if there's any real connections if I go through my top 5 films in the past few years. It's probably just a lot of filmmakers getting out there and making really good films. There are definitely some trends that are on the rise, though, some really good trends. One of them, which I really like, is we're really seeing the rise of neon cinema. I mean, neon cinema really kicked off in the mid 2010s with John Wick and A Good Time from the Safdie brothers, but I'm definitely seeing a lot more films this decade that seem to really be embracing having neon lighting in there. And for me, that's one of the best things a film can be visually, is to be absolutely loaded with neon lights and neon lighting. I think that's the most amazing thing. Things look beautiful in neon lighting, so I think that's on the rise.
I thought you were referring to Neon, the production and distribution company, for a second.
Oh, okay. I guess that probably needs some clarity. But yeah, the use of neon films, I think a lot of people are doing some really great stuff with that lately. So I'm really pleased to see that come out and that to be a little bit of a trend. There also seems to be a very good trend for films with really good needle drops in there, just banging out these tunes at the right point at a scene transition or a pivotal point in a film. I think filmmakers are doing a really good job these days of incorporating modern music into their films, and sometimes older songs also. I think like they're really good, and I guess a film which might incorporate good music as well as good neon visuals. I think just Bullet Train sprung to mind, and that's even a pretty commercial film, and that's still doing great stuff with neon and with soundtrack and everything. So those things are all in the positive. And another trend which I think is on the rise, it's not necessarily my favorite trend, but it's Tom's favorite trend, so I think it's worth mentioning, is stressful cinema. It's been on the rise ever since Uncut Gems, and we did do a podcast on it for anybody who's listening. Is stress underrated? And I think we are seeing a lot more stressful films. I mean, we've got our Best Picture frontrunner for this year, Nora, which is described as a Safdie Brothers or an Uncut Gem style romantic comedy. So that sort of stressful cinema is on the rise, which is interesting. I'm not the biggest fan of stressful cinema, but I guess what I like about it is that stressful cinema tends to be quite kinetic. And if it's done well, it's also very paranoid and anxiety driven. And I don't think there's anything much better than an anxiety driven film. I think that's really where I dig in cinema, because it sort of speaks to me as an individual. If a film can capture an anxiety and dread really well, I think it's doing a really good job. So yeah, all those things to me seem to be on the rise, and yeah, it's a great thing. We're seeing a lot of great, very visual directors doing some really good things lately and being recognised for it. I mean, you just have to look at Yorgo Lanthimos and Poor Things, and an incredible vision that he brought to that film and winning 4 Oscars. It's amazing, a lot of the films that are being made these days, and yeah, I just think it's an upward trend in cinema. From a decade that started off with 2 really mediocre years, things really seem to be on the rise now. We're getting just such great stuff coming out. I mean, 2024, I might mention a couple of films because they probably won't be in my top 10 by the end of the year when we record our Best of the Year podcast, but things like Trap from M. Night Shyamalan, that taps into the stressful cinema movement. Also really great neon visuals in there also, because it's 7-sided concert. We've got things like Heretic, which is a bit of a horror comedy with Hugh Grant in there. So I think horror comedies are also on the rise also. So yeah, I just got some really great stuff coming out lately, which makes me just feel really positive about the way this decade's trending, even with the rise of streaming originals.
Yeah, I can't believe none of us brought up stressor so far. We did do an actual episode about it, and we all suggested at that point that, hey, maybe a new genre will be born. Won't be, we won't talk about it as horror, we talk about it as the stressor, because the stressors can be anything. Indeed, like Nora, where it's like literally a romantic comedy with many of these elements. So that's definitely an incredible change. I also fully agree with you on the Neon. I think that a lot of films, especially on that more indie scene and around the world, are just embracing more bold aesthetics, and they throwing on those neon colors or tweaking the colors in different ways. Films just get a different look, and then you have something like I Saw the TV Glow that just goes in even more extreme direction too. That was had some really cool, really cool effects.
Yeah, I saw the TV Glow is an awesome film. I'll try and avoid rambling about it too much because unless this upcoming Oscar season is really good, which it might be, it'll probably still be in my top five going into the podcast for the best films of 2024. But yeah, I just love the neon visuals of that. Just love the way that sort of like plays around with like what is reality, and also the director's previous film, We're All Going to the World's Fair. That's also a really cool film, really interesting aesthetic going in there. And I'm just wondering what sort of films are going to get influenced by that, because I think the director, I think they're a very interesting vision, and I think it might change a little bit the scape of films coming out. I think they're very influential, and yeah, I just love the fact that it's got such a good reception.
Yeah, the people at Post Raider were loving it. It was completely unexpected, like it winning over the Old Guard and everyone around the world. Though it still has a very low average rating on IMDb, which shocked me when I saw that. But what can you do?
That's the other trend. The other trend that's not really movie making trend, but film rating trend is that IMDb is on the down, Letterboxd is on the rise. IMDb is generally used these days by an older demographic, a more conservative demographic. The Letterboxd demographic is sort of where the up and coming filmmakers are, where the up and coming film fans are. So I guess that's another trend, and you're getting films these days that aren't name dropping IMDb. I mean, back in the old days, you'd have a film and then have like a fake film within the film or fake actor within the film, and I'd go to the IMDb or the fake IMDb page. That's not happening these days. These days, Letterboxd is getting dropped instead. So yeah, that's cool. It's a trend and it's interesting.
I had completely forgotten about it, and that is so true. I mean, just checking it now. On IMDb, it has 5.8 out of 10 from around 30K ratings, and on Letterboxd, it has a 3.5 out of 5, which would be 7 out of 10 from 156,000. So that's just insane. And we did a full episode on Letterboxd versus IMDb as well. You can go listen to that episode if you want some more insights on that. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It's not just the films that are changing, it's how and where we're rating, discussing, coming together as cinephiles. And one of the biggest changes is that IMDb is indeed going down and Letterboxd is rising, especially for that core cinephile group. What about you, Adam? In your recent viewings, like what have you loved the most about them? Have you seen any trends or anything that just got you generally happy or excited?
I think there's quite a lot of, really good American ones as well that are maybe slightly more under the radar. I like the film Bottoms, which again was not something I'd expect to like. I loved like The Holdovers, Never Rarely, Sometimes Always. I've got no idea what the trend is. I don't know if it's just matching my general kind of taste. I think there's been a few good Japanese films this decade, Korean films as well, Iranian films. Like I think that there's a lot of really good films from those countries that are getting quite a lot of attention in films. I think I probably would need to wait a few more years to watch more from this decade to really know. Because right now, I guess, yeah, I don't know if I can make a general comment on the way cinema is going.
So that was at least a passionate defense of the slightly more indie side of the US. And yeah, no, I mean, I think that I agree with you there, Adam. And I would say it's a bit of a trend, actually, that you have more mid-budget or even lower budget prestige films coming out. They're not necessarily from Hollywood, but they're shining through and they're getting critical attention. I think that's something that's been a really huge shakeup in the last decade. It's properly started kicking off last decade, but it's one of those things that's been a staple of the 2020s in my mind. So just this, again, A24 and Neon, there's lots of others as well. And just the US course correcting and really getting a lot of interesting films out there. In my view of the 2020s, what gives me a lot of hope is that cinephile culture, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, it seems to have seeped in to the academy. They seeped in a bit more to the mainstream than they have in a long time. I mentioned Poor Things becoming a bit of a blockbuster. That's something that you would never, ever, ever have anticipated. And then you had Zone of Interest also being nominated for Best Picture, which is literally a minimalist film. Like I think that there's a lot more bold authorist films that are hitting the academy and hitting mainstream viewers than before. I think that streaming has opened things up a little bit, and hopefully it will continue to make more films accessible. In terms of trends, I would say that the biggest trend, what makes me the most excited right now, is Spain. I think that there's so many, like it started in the 2010s properly. Like you got the Galician New Wave, which has been a little bit quiet of late. But just so many exciting new Spanish directors like Carla Simón and Esteban Surguren just coming up with great, amazing films. And I think the one thing that really, really excites me, and it feels like almost a universal trend, or at least a universal European and North and South American trend, is just this slight focus away from more like dull camera work. So I think you have a bit of a switch here. So on one side, there's a trend that frustrates me, but there's a lack of focus on visuals, which is really annoying. But on the others, you have like a pretty beautiful counter-reaction of films that are just really visually and emotionally immersive. Like you have films like Playground, for instance, which take you into the world of children. You have so many films now taking you into the world of children, letting you see things from their perspective. You have so many films that, like I mentioned Sean Baker, like Nora is one of the best films of the year. You have these films that they don't just tell you the story in like a normal, like here's one scene, they talk and progress to another scene. They move at a more rapid pace. They're more intuitively connected. They're a little bit more shoppy. They're a little bit more playful, and they're a lot more cinematic. And I think that that's the counter reaction that's giving me so much hope about where cinema is going to go. I think there's a lot of, like, I mean, Rod Juda is fantastic. I absolutely love him as well. I think Romania is still going strong. I think Iran is just having an insane moment. I want to have an episode about Iran, be it all of Iran or just Iran this decade at one point, because the amount of great Iranian films coming out now is utterly insane. I mean, we did our ICM Forum Film Festival. It just finished a couple of days ago at the point of recording, and 3 out of the 4 films in the Asian slate were from Iran. There's always more and more exciting films and more exciting directors from that country. So I can't believe how they're doing it, especially with directors fleeing as well. But there's still getting so much exciting stuff done. I do think in terms of negatives that Asia is weak. It has a bit of a power surge, a bit like the US. Japan is always going to be good, but I'm Howliguchi is kind of like becoming like this main staple of Japan. There's not that many other directors you're hearing about, annoyingly. And China has their new policies, but now we're more negative again. So let's move away from that and bring this beautiful episode towards a close. So Adam, you said that you don't have any trends yet, but I'd like to or ask you, Arthur, like, what do you think this decade will be known for in like maybe not in 5 years when it's done, but like in 10, 20 years, like when people look back at the 2020s and 2020 cinema, what do you think people will be talking about and pointing out as like special characteristics?
Yeah, I do think there would be a rise in more genre films, a rise in foreign films, and I do think Hollywood will have to do a makeover by the end of the decade. And I am trying to think of stuff that'll probably get a resurgence, or at least like a reevaluation. And I do think the one film that is really going to stand out with that is the Joker sequel. I was really impressed seeing that, especially compared to the first part, since it kind of plays onto it. And I think because of that, it was so hated, but give it 10 years and it's going to be a highly respected film. I'm like 100% sure of that.
I still haven't seen that one because of the critical pushback. So I'll take your word for it, and I'll actually go and watch it. Then I'll see if either maybe I'll hate it now, like join that trend and then flip in a decade, or I'll join the resistance. Let's see. And so you threw out a lot of trends already, but in 5 or 10 years, or even further in the future, what do you think the 2020s will be remembered for?
Yeah, that one seems a little bit hard to judge at the moment. I would like to say for the rise of neon drenched cinema and for the rise of stressful cinema. But yeah, it's just too hard to say, I think, because I'm just basing that on 3 years worth of film, 2 mediocre film years and 3 great film years. That seems to be on the trend, on the rise. I'm hoping it'll be remembered for more screen life films, but I don't know how much that's on the rise yet. I mean, that seemed to be on the rise with Unfriended and Searching in the 2010s, but I don't think it's really taken off the same way. But we'll see. We might get other movements come out. I think it's just really hard to judge. It'll be interesting to re-listen to this episode in 2030 if we're still doing talking images there and just reflect back and go, oh, this is what this decade's known for. I guess I hope it will be remembered for meta cinema, I guess, would be good because we had the Scream 5 and Scream 6, which were excellent. And there's a few more other things that haven't been quite as great that have come out that sort of tried to do the meta horror thing. So I'm hoping it'll be remembered for that. I hope it'll be remembered for great horror comedies, great indie comedies. I mean, there have been a lot of really cool stuff. Things that just do weird, interesting things like Poor Things. Things like Poor Things and Everywhere All at Once winning 4 or more Oscars each. That's great. Sort of like to see that sort of, well, this is the decade where it sort of breaks in or whatever, and all the unusual films are the ones that start replacing the Oscar baity films, because that will just change everything. All these boring biopics, and we do have an episode coming up for 2025 about why biopics bore us, so maybe they don't all do, but all these like sort of like prestige Hollywood films, I'm hoping will end up going down if people see that sort of the awards buzz and the recognition is behind these indie films and these weird films that do really strange and unusual things. So that's what I'm hoping 2020 will be remembered for, that we get like a decade of really cool, out there films that end up winning Best Picture or end up winning big Oscars and stuff like that. But if we're just thinking about, 70s Best Picture winners compared to early 60s ones, but then you get things like Midnight Cowboy in 69, you got The French Connection come out, the 2 Godfather films. If you get like stuff like that, Deer Hunter, I think you sort of get that sort of like rise of the grittier ones in the 70s compared to the biopic ones like A Man for All Seasons. I'm hoping we'd sort of see that sort of trend in the 2020s, that we see these quirky films like that film from the Daniels that are able to sort of like get out there and get that recognition as the best film of the year.
Yeah, that would be absolutely amazing. You might be very, very right there, Saul. And on the meta thing, I hope so too. I mean, you already mentioned Bad Luck Banging. I mean, I love it how you do that. And this I'm not as big on the screen films as you, but there's the meta trend. I really hope that continues, and that it essentially just brings some fresh life into a lot of those really awesome ideas of the new waves of the 1960s. That ties in with what Arthur was saying earlier too. That he kind of thinks we are in the new 60s where Hollywood will be replaced. So maybe these ideas will come back and they will shake things up, and it will be absolutely awesome. And the 2020s will be remembered as warmly as the 60s were. For you, Adam, I'll ask you a slightly different question, which is simply just like, what do you hope to see in the 5 years to come, and what do you hope the decade will be remembered for?
One of my bigger hopes is like the independent films keep getting attention. It's quite exciting to see what emerges from places like Iran. I feel like it's possible over the next few years, maybe it's longer term, but I feel like you might start getting more foreign films winning or being nominated for bigger awards, things like the Oscars. I think there's a slight trend in the Oscars, maybe some of the other award ceremonies, away from the more sort of traditional winners and nominees. So I think you might start seeing more different types of films like that. I think the Oscars is changing a little bit, and I hope that's a trend that kind of continues.
Yeah, I completely agree with your hopes. I think it's going to come through, to be honest. I think that the 2020s will be increasingly remembered for the decade when international cinema kind of merged more into the American conversation. I think that it's going to be a decade known for, a bit like the 70s or late 60s were known for like these more maverick directors, New Hollywood coming out. I think that this decade is going to be known for A24. It already is. And like I think that names like Sean Baker, Robert Egger, etc. are going to be like huge in the US. And yeah, I think that hopefully those we're going to be known for a decade that just got more visual again. Hopefully that a decade where we got beautiful visually immersive films from around the world that just managed to hit that emotional core. Because I think that cinema now that technology has gotten so small, so loose, we're seeing so many more visually immersive films than before. Like movements is getting absolutely crazy. I think that audience are also getting used to it. Young people now, they're on TikTok. They want things to move fast. They're not going to be annoyed if things skip or there's rough cuts, etc. You're allowed to play around more with the medium. And I think that we have a generation now, or generations even now, that are just more open to more challenging cinema. And I think that this decade, the very best of this decade, can be at the forefront of that, and hopefully it will amplify over the next 5 years and maybe amplify for the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years. So with that, the future is looking fairly bright for me. I thought cinema was in a little bit of a dark spot when like a decade ago, in the mid-10s. I thought, wow, like the older generations from the 60s and 70s, they're getting older, dying out. They're still the ones making most of the great and interesting films, at least to me. We're not seeing these new master directors pop up. But now we have so many huge names that started making films in this century. Even the last 10 years have become staples. People know them, people go to see their films. It's just absolutely wonderful to see. It feels like a bit of a rebirth. And hopefully we can listen back to this episode in 5 years and see that our predictions and hopes came true. I suppose it's the opposite of a New Year's resolution. The season 5 finale of ours. It is a New Year's hope, a middle of the decade hope. And yeah, let us know if you share that hope, or if you think it will all come crumbling down, or if you disagree completely. You think Marvel and Hollywood are the best things going right now. They're doing great, and they continue doing great. If you do, please come to icmforum.com and just let us know. Rip us a new one. And yeah, here's to 2025 and to at least 5 more years. Thank you so much for listening, and see us again soon.
You have been listening to Talking Images, the official podcast of icmforum.com.